Jake had always preferred solitude, living on the outskirts of the mining colony of Valora, where the dense forests and harsh landscape kept the world at bay. His days were spent patching up workers or tending to his small cabin with little company beyond the occasional visitor seeking medical help. So when he found the creature in the woods, he almost didn't believe his eyes. The animal was massive, far larger than any native creature he had seen, with fur that shimmered like moonlight and eyes that glowed a strange shade of blue. Not like any animal he had ever encountered, it was sprawled out near a craggy outcrop, its chest rising and falling in shallow breaths, as if it had been wounded badly. Jake's instincts as a medic kicked in. He didn't hesitate, even though something about the creature felt off, like it wasn't just some animal, but something far more. Jake approached cautiously, his boots crunching on the dry underbrush. The creature's eyes flickered towards him, locking with his. For a moment, that unsettling intelligence in its gaze sent a chill down his spine, but he shrugged it off, his focus on the task at hand. Getting closer, he could see the deep gash along the beast's side, a long tear that had almost pierced its ribs. Whatever had done this had been brutal. The beast's chest rose and fell rapidly with each painful breath, but it made no attempt to move. Jake knelt beside it, his fingers brushing the creature's fur, its body warm and slick with sweat. He spoke softly to it, despite knowing it couldn't understand. Hoping to calm it down, he muttered, "Easy there, let's get you fixed up." But the beast did not respond, except for a soft growl that sent a slight tremor through Jake's hands. He ignored the growl, his fingers searching for the wound. It was a deep gash, jagged and oozing a dark fluid. He winced at the sight, but didn't hesitate. Carefully, he gathered his medkit from his pack and set to work, first disinfecting the wound, then stitching it up using his best skill as a medic, his fingers moving quickly and sure, even though his mind kept racing with questions about this creature. He had never seen anything like it. As he worked, Jake noticed that the creature's breathing slowed, the growls subsiding into soft huffs of air. Its body began to relax under his hands. Something in him softened, seeing the creature trust him enough to stay still. Even though it was in pain, he couldn't help but feel a strange bond forming between them. This wasn't just a wild animal, it was something else, something far more important than just a creature. When he finished the stitches, he sat back and examined his work. The beast's wound was still raw, but it looked like it would heal, and for a moment, Jake thought he saw a flicker of appreciation in the creature's eyes. But then it growled again, this time low and threatening, as if warning him to back off. Jake frowned, wondering if the creature was finally going to attack, but instead, it shifted its body awkwardly and stood slowly on all fours. It staggered slightly, clearly weakened. But it didn't lash out, it just looked at him with those glowing blue eyes, and for the briefest moment, Jake wondered if he had just done something far bigger than he could imagine. Jake sat frozen, watching the creature rise to its feet. His heart pounded in his chest, wondering what was about to happen. But instead of attacking, it simply swayed on its legs for a moment, then gave him a long, considering look before limping a few steps away. It didn't seem to want to leave, but neither did it seem entirely at ease. Jake watched as it paused and looked back at him with those glowing blue eyes, its gaze almost human, as if it was making a decision of its own. Despite the growl earlier, it didn't seem to have any immediate intention of harming him. Something in Jake's gut told him that this creature was no ordinary beast. He stood up carefully, watching its every movement. The beast moved further into the forest, limping, but still heading deeper into the dense underbrush. Jake followed, unsure of what to do. He had never encountered anything like this before, and he certainly didn't know what kind of creature it was. But he couldn't leave it out there, not after everything he had just done. To help it, he had treated it. And now it seemed to be trusting him in some way. He felt an odd pull to keep it close, even though his rational mind screamed that this was a dangerous situation. The creature stopped in its tracks, as if sensing him behind it. Then it turned its head slowly to face him once again, locking eyes with him. Jake felt a twinge of unease, something primal stirring inside him. But he didn't move. Instead, he held the creature's gaze for a moment before speaking softly. "It's okay, I'm not going to hurt you." It seemed to regard him for a long moment before it nodded its massive head slightly, as if understanding his words. It then turned and started walking again, this time at a much slower pace. Jake hesitated for a moment before following. The creature led him through the forest, its pace steady, but cautious. Jake could feel the tension in the air, like the forest itself was holding its breath. He kept his distance, but stayed close enough to help if it faltered again. Something was off, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. There was an energy surrounding the creature, a strange force that seemed to hum just beneath the surface, and Jake couldn't ignore it. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just an injured animal. There was something more to it, something beyond what he could comprehend. But for now, he was the only one around to help, and he wasn't about to turn his back on it. Eventually, the creature stopped near a small clearing, its head swinging around to look at him. Once more, this time its eyes softened slightly, and Jake felt a strange warmth in his chest, a connection he couldn't explain. The beast lowered its body to the ground, as if inviting him closer. Without hesitation, Jake moved forward and knelt down beside it, his hands brushing its fur gently. The creature didn't flinch. It allowed him to touch it, and for the first time he felt a fleeting sense of peace, as if they were in this together, just a man and a beast, bound by some unspoken understanding. At that moment, he knew he had made a decision that would change everything, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for what would come next. Jake spent the next few days tending to the creature as it recovered in the clearing, not far from his cabin. Every time he returned to check on it, he noticed something strange about the way it reacted to him. It would watch him with an intensity that felt almost human, as though it was waiting for him to do something or say something, but Jake couldn't figure out what it wanted. No matter how much he tried to observe, it was clear that this wasn't just a wild animal. Despite its imposing size and strange appearance, there was something more to it, something that seemed aware of everything around it. He fed it when it was hungry and treated the wounds on its side, but nothing could shake the feeling that there was a hidden depth to the creature that he wasn't seeing yet. One evening, as he sat near the creature, watching the setting sun through the trees, he heard the unmistakable sound of engines roaring in the distance. At first, he thought it was just a passing freighter or one of the mining trucks. But the sound grew louder and closer. His instincts flared, and he stood up quickly, scanning the tree line, his hand automatically reaching for his old blaster, still holstered from his soldier days. But before he could react, the creature stirred and stood to its feet, its body tensing as its eyes glowed brighter. Jake turned his gaze toward it just in time to see it shift its weight in a low crouch, ready to spring. Its growls were deep and ominous. Something was coming, and it was dangerous. Jake's heart raced as the noise grew closer and closer, until finally a group of heavily armed men emerged from the forest. They were dressed in dark combat armor, with insignias that Jake didn't recognize. Their faces were concealed behind helmets, but the weapons they carried made it clear they weren't here for a friendly visit. One of them barked an order, and the others spread out around the clearing, searching for something or someone. Jake instinctively backed away from the creature, keeping his distance, not knowing if they were there for him or for it. But his pulse quickened as he realized they weren't here by accident. These men knew exactly where they were going, and it wasn't long before one of them spotted the creature. "That's it," one of them said in a gruff voice, his tone filled with authority. The others turned to look at the creature, who was now standing motionless, eyes glowing with a quiet yet undeniable power. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea what this creature was, but now he knew for certain it wasn't just a wild animal. These men were after it, and whatever it was, they didn't seem to have good intentions. Before Jake could react, another soldier stepped forward, this one holding up a strange device that emitted a faint humming noise. As it scanned the beast, the creature's stance shifted slightly as if it sensed the technology's effect. Jake's instincts screamed at him to act, but he was frozen in place. He couldn't let them take it. But he had no idea what to do next. He looked at the creature, whose eyes locked onto his once again, with that same unnerving intelligence, as if it was waiting for him to make a move. One of the soldiers shouted, "We found it, Baroness will be pleased." But Jake couldn't process their words. He was too focused on the creature's next move. Whatever it was about to do could change everything for both of them. He felt a cold sweat on the back of his neck. And as the tension thickened in the air, Jake realized with dawning horror that the situation was far worse than he could have ever imagined. The creature's growl broke the tense silence, sending a shiver through Jake's spine, its body tensed as its glowing eyes narrowed on the soldiers, a deep rumble coming from deep within its chest. Jake's heart pounded as he instinctively took a step back, but the creature didn't move. Instead, it seemed to draw in some kind of energy from the surroundings. The air seemed to vibrate with unseen power. Jake had no idea what was happening, but he knew it wasn't good. One of the soldiers lifted his weapon, aiming it straight at the beast, and Jake's hand shot to his side where his blaster rested. But before he could even pull it free, the creature lunged its massive form, moving faster than Jake could track it. In a blur of motion, it collided with the soldier, knocking him off his feet and sending his rifle flying into the air. The others reacted quickly, but the creature was faster. Its claws slashed through the air with an unnatural speed and precision. The soldiers scattered, trying to regain control, but they were no match for the creature's ferocity. Jake watched in stunned disbelief as the creature tore through the soldiers with brutal efficiency. The air was filled with the sounds of metal twisting and soldiers shouting in confusion and pain. It was clear these men had not expected such a vicious response, and they were unprepared for the creature's wrath. But as much as Jake wanted to help, he couldn't move. His legs were frozen to the spot. He didn't know if it was fear or awe, but he couldn't bring himself to intervene, not while the creature fought with such raw power. The fight seemed to last only moments, but in reality it had been a chaotic blur. The creature moved like a storm, ripping through the soldiers with terrifying speed, until only one remained standing. The last soldier stumbled backward, his face pale beneath his helmet as he tried to raise his weapon. But before he could react, the creature turned its gaze on him, its eyes glowing brighter now, with an almost predatory gleam. The soldier hesitated for a moment, then dropped his weapon and fell to his knees, hands raised in surrender. The creature didn't move. It simply watched him with those glowing eyes, and Jake realized then that the creature wasn't just attacking out of rage. It was doing so with purpose, as if it knew exactly what it was doing. "Please don't kill me," the soldier begged, his voice trembling with fear. "I was just following orders." But the creature didn't answer. It simply stared at him for a long moment before slowly backing away, as if deciding to spare him. With a final growl, the creature turned its back on the soldier and limped toward Jake, its movements slow but deliberate, as if it had made its choice. Jake swallowed hard as the creature came closer, its eyes no longer filled with anger, but with something else, something like understanding. He stood frozen, not knowing what to say or do. The soldier behind him was still muttering in fear, but Jake was too focused on the creature to care. The beast stopped just a few feet away and looked at him, its gaze soft yet intense. And for a moment, Jake felt as if the creature was speaking to him without words, as if it was telling him something important, something that went beyond mere survival. Finally, Jake managed to speak, though his voice was barely more than a whisper. "What do you want from me?" he asked, unsure if the creature even understood the question, but he couldn't ignore the weight of the moment. The creature stood silently, as if considering his words, before it lowered its head slightly, and in that moment, Jake knew that whatever had brought them together, it was far from over. The danger was just beginning. The creature lowered its head, as if considering Jake's words, its glowing eyes never leaving his face. Jake felt the weight of the moment settle over him, his mind racing with questions about what he had just witnessed and what would happen next. He had no answers. All he knew was that the creature was not just an animal. It was something far more complex, far more dangerous, and he had somehow become its protector. The soldier behind them was still kneeling, trembling in fear, his hands raised in a futile gesture of surrender, but Jake paid him no mind. His attention focused entirely on the creature as it took a slow step forward and stopped just in front of him. The air between them seemed to hum with energy, the creature's breathing deep and steady, its eyes searching Jake's as though waiting for him to make a decision. And that's when it hit Jake with a sudden clarity. This creature wasn't just injured, it was lost. It had been alone and scared, and somehow it had found him. Jake's thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of engines once again, this time much closer, the hum of a ship's thrusters growing louder as it approached the clearing. His heart skipped a beat, knowing that more soldiers were coming. More of the Baroness's forces would be on them soon, and this time they wouldn't be as easy to scare off as the last group. He had to make a decision fast. But his mind kept circling back to the creature standing before him, its eyes still fixed on him, with that same quiet intelligence. Jake felt a surge of determination well up inside him. Whatever this creature was, whatever it meant, it was clear that he couldn't just let it be taken back to the Baroness, not when he had a chance to protect it. The soldier behind him was still cowering on the ground, muttering to himself, and Jake knew he had no time to waste. He turned to the soldier and barked an order, "Get up and get out of here." The man looked up at him in confusion, but Jake repeated himself, "Move now before they catch you." The soldier hesitated for a moment before scrambling to his feet and running off into the woods, leaving Jake alone with the creature as the sounds of the approaching ship grew louder. Jake didn't have much time before they would be on him. He glanced at the creature and saw its eyes flash toward the horizon, sensing the incoming threat. It was still weak from its injuries, but there was no mistaking the power radiating from its form. Even now, the creature's muscles coiled beneath its fur, as if preparing for the battle ahead. Jake's heart raced, his instincts screaming at him to run, but something kept him in place. Something kept him standing firm beside the beast. He wasn't sure what it was, but he knew he couldn't back down now, not when the creature had trusted him with its life. With one last glance at the clearing, Jake made a snap decision. He turned and sprinted toward his cabin, not looking back. Even as the roar of the ship's engines filled the air, the creature stayed close behind, moving with surprising speed. Considering its injuries, it was clear that it wasn't just any animal, it was a force to be reckoned with, and Jake had a feeling that he had just made an ally in something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. As Jake reached the cabin, he didn't hesitate. He grabbed his old blaster from the table and checked the ammunition. He had no idea what kind of battle was about to unfold, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let anyone take the creature without a fight. And whatever came next, he would stand beside it until the very end. Jake spent the next few hours inside the cabin preparing for the worst. The creature had settled in the corner of the small living room, its glowing eyes flickering in and out as it rested, but Jake could feel a tension building between them. He couldn't explain it, but the creature's presence was unsettling in a way he couldn't shake, as if it was more than just a companion, more than just a being he had saved from the wilderness. There was something ancient in its gaze, something old and full of power that Jake couldn't understand. But he knew it wasn't just a wild animal, and as he sat near the window, looking out into the darkening sky, he couldn't help but wonder just how deep this connection went, and what he had gotten himself into. The distant hum of the approaching ship filled the air again, this time closer still, and Jake felt the fear in his gut twist tighter. The Baroness's forces were coming for them. They wouldn't stop until they had the creature in their possession, and Jake wasn't sure if he could stop them. But he couldn't let them take it, not after everything he had witnessed, not after the bond that had formed between them. He had never been the type to get involved in larger conflicts. He had always kept to himself. But now it was clear he was in the middle of something far bigger than he had ever imagined. As the minutes ticked by, Jake's mind raced with questions and possibilities, but the creature stayed calm, its eyes fixed on him, every now and then glancing at the door, as if sensing the threat outside. Jake couldn't explain how it knew, but it was clear the beast understood more than he had first thought. Whatever it wasn't just a beast. It was something far more intelligent, far more aware than any creature Jake had encountered before, and he knew he couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands, not when it could change everything. The ship's engines rolled closer now, so loud Jake could feel the vibration in the cabin. He didn't have much time. He grabbed his blaster and slid the power pack into place, his heart thudding in his chest as he checked the weapon one last time, his fingers shaking, not from fear, but from the overwhelming sense of responsibility he felt for the creature beside him. He didn't know why it had chosen him, but he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. A sudden knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. It was quiet at first, but then came again, more insistent this time. Jake's grip tightened on the blaster, but he didn't move. The creature's eyes locked on him, and he could feel its energy pulse around him, a low hum that seemed to grow with each passing moment. Jake's pulse quickened. He wasn't sure what was coming, but he knew the Baroness's forces wouldn't give up easily, and if they couldn't take the creature by force, they would stop at nothing to get it. He stood slowly, his breath steady, as he approached the door and peered through the small window. The sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. A group of soldiers stood outside, armed and ready, but behind them in the distance was something far more terrifying, a massive warship hovering above the clearing, its weapons glowing with ominous light. Jake's throat tightened. The stakes had just escalated beyond anything he could have imagined. These soldiers were only the beginning. The real danger was right behind them, and Jake knew he had no choice now. He would have to fight back or lose everything. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the soldiers outside the cabin, their armor glinting in the low light of the setting sun. The warship above cast a heavy shadow over the landscape, its massive bulk blocking out the sky. The soldiers were waiting for something, maybe an order or a signal, but Jake didn't have the luxury of time to figure it out. They knew they were close. They knew they had found the creature, and they wouldn't hesitate to take it by force if necessary. His hands tightened around the blaster as he turned back toward the creature. It was standing now, its eyes glowing brightly, its body coiled with quiet energy. It seemed to sense the danger too, its muscles tensing under its fur. Jake didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain: they had to move fast. He turned back to the door, his mind racing with options, but none of them felt like they would work. They were outnumbered and outgunned, and the creature was still recovering from its injuries. There was no way they could take on the Baroness's forces head-on, but Jake wasn't going to give up without a fight, not when he had come so far to protect this being. Whatever it was, he had a strange feeling that the creature was more important than just the people hunting it. They were part of something far bigger, something that Jake was only beginning to understand. The soldiers outside moved again, taking up positions around the cabin, their weapons ready. Jake held his breath, knowing the moment was coming. They were about to force their way in, and there was nothing he could do to stop them alone. But as the seconds ticked by, he realized something. The creature wasn't standing still. It was moving closer to the door, its massive form stepping lightly. Despite its size, its eyes fixed on him. Jake didn't have to ask what it was planning. It was ready. It wasn't just waiting for him to act. It was waiting for the right moment, and that moment was now. The door suddenly burst open with a loud crash, and the soldiers poured into the room, weapons raised. Jake barely had time to react before the creature lunged forward, its claws swiping through the air with blinding speed, taking down two of the soldiers before they even had a chance to fire. The others staggered back in shock, but they didn't retreat. They were trained for this, and they quickly regrouped, aiming their weapons at the creature. But Jake wasn't about to let them have a chance to fire. He moved in front of the creature, positioning himself between it and the soldiers, his blaster raised. He fired, first taking down the nearest soldier in one shot. The others hesitated just long enough for the creature to strike again, its claws slashing through armor and flesh with terrifying ease. Jake's pulse raced as the fight erupted around him, the air filled with the crackle of gunfire and the thundering growls of the creature, its strength and speed making the soldiers seem like amateurs in comparison. But Jake knew they wouldn't back down easily, and there were still too many of them. The warship overhead was still watching, waiting for its moment to intervene, and Jake could hear the engines powering up as if preparing to strike. The creature turned its gaze to him, its eyes flashing with a strange understanding, as if it knew they needed to move quickly. Jake didn't hesitate. He fired again, taking out another soldier before ducking behind the nearest piece of cover. He glanced back at the creature as it leaped over the fallen bodies of the soldiers to attack the remaining few with a vicious determination. Jake could see the creature's power unfolding with each swipe, its growl shaking the air. And he realized then that this wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a battle for control, a battle to determine who would hold the power, and Jake knew the creature wasn't just fighting for itself, it was fighting for them both. Jake's heart pounded as the creature moved with deadly precision, its claws slicing through the soldiers with terrifying speed and power. He could see the fear in their eyes as they tried to regroup. But it was already too late. The creature was on them faster than they could react. The room was filled with the sound of screams and the sharp crack of gunfire as Jake took out another soldier, his shots quick and precise. He couldn't afford to miss with the warship still hovering above them. The soldiers were the least of his worries, but their weapons were a serious threat if they had a chance to get a clear shot. The creature tore through the remaining soldiers with ruthless efficiency, its glowing eyes fixed on each target with chilling focus. Jake couldn't believe how fast it moved, how powerful it was. But it wasn't enough. The warship above them was still a looming presence, and he could hear its engines powering up louder now. It was going to strike, and if they didn't act fast, they'd be caught in its blast zone. Jake glanced at the creature, his mind racing for a plan. They couldn't fight the warship, not with their current position, and the odds stacked against them. But he knew they had one chance to escape. If they could get to the forest, they might have a shot at losing the warship's line of sight. The creature seemed to read his thoughts, its eyes flickering toward the door, as if waiting for Jake to make a move. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the creature's shoulder and jerked it toward the door. "We have to go now," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos of the battle. The creature responded immediately, springing into action as they bolted for the door. Jake kept his blaster raised, firing one last shot at the remaining soldier who was trying to scramble for cover. The blast hit its mark, and the soldier collapsed. But there was no time to check if he was alive. Jake's feet pounded against the floor as they raced through the cabin toward the forest beyond. The creature was right behind him, moving fast despite its injuries, and the two of them burst out into the cool night air as the warship's engines roared to life above them. Jake didn't dare look back. He could feel the heat of the engines on his back as the warship began its descent, the ground shaking beneath his feet. As it prepared to launch an attack, they had to get to cover fast. The forest was their only hope, and as Jake pushed through the thick underbrush, he could hear the roar of the warship's weapons, charging up, the sound of energy building like thunder ready to strike. The creature was ahead of him now, its massive form weaving through the trees with surprising agility. Despite its size, Jake's legs burned from the effort, but he pushed forward, desperate to keep up and keep ahead of the warship's targeting systems that were surely zeroing in on them. But before he could get far enough to feel safe, the warship opened fire, its weapons lighting up the sky in a brilliant flash of destructive power. Jake heard the explosion before he felt it, the shockwave hitting him like a fist slamming into his chest. He stumbled and fell forward, but the creature was already there, its massive body shielding him from the blast, the force of the explosion knocking both of them to the ground. But Jake barely had time to process it before the creature was up again, pulling him to his feet with surprising strength. "Move," Jake gasped as he struggled to keep his balance. The creature didn't need to be told. It was already running again, its eyes scanning the forest ahead. They were close now, so close to the cover of the trees. But the warship wouldn't give up that easily, and Jake knew they had only moments before they would be cornered. Jake's breath came in ragged gasps as he pushed forward, his legs burning with exhaustion. But he couldn't stop, not now. Not with the warship looming above them. The creature was running faster than Jake could keep up, its form weaving through the trees with a fluidity that seemed unnatural, its glowing eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of the enemy, its every movement calculated and swift. The blast from the warship had shaken him, but the creature wasn't fazed. It moved like it had done this countless times before. Jake stumbled over a root, but the creature was there immediately, its massive form bracing him before he could fall. It didn't pause, it just kept running, pulling Jake along as if he weighed nothing. Its speed and power were both awe-inspiring and terrifying, and Jake could feel a sense of urgency in every step they took. The warship was still overhead, and he could hear the thrum of its engines charging up again. The air around them crackled with tension as the ship prepared to fire. They were almost at the edge of the forest now. Jake could see the dim outline of the cliffs ahead, where the trees thinned out, but there was no time to get there. The warship would catch them long before they reached safety. They needed a plan, and fast his mind raced trying to come up with something, but all he could think of was the creature beside him, the bond that had formed between them, the way it had trusted him, without question, the way it had protected him in the cabin, and now it was fighting with him to survive. He glanced at the creature, its eyes flashing with an intensity he had never seen before. It wasn't just a beast. It was something else, something ancient and powerful, something that had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Jake felt a spark of understanding pass between them. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for freedom for whatever this creature was. Whatever it meant, they couldn't let the warship win. They couldn't let the Baroness take control. Without thinking, Jake drew his blaster and aimed it upward toward the warship. As it hovered overhead, the weapons glowing in the dark sky, he fired a shot into the air. And for a brief moment, the ship's targeting systems seemed to shift its focus toward him. The creature noticed immediately its eyes locking onto Jake, and for the first time it let out a sound, a deep growl that vibrated through the air, as if it was calling out to the warship, a challenge, a declaration that they wouldn't be taken without a fight. Jake's heart raced as he realized what the creature was doing. It wasn't just drawing attention to itself, it was offering itself up as bait. But Jake couldn't let that happen. He couldn't let the creature sacrifice itself for him. He had to act fast. He grabbed the creature's arm, pulling it with him as they veered off course, heading toward the cliffs. Jake's mind was spinning as he tried to come up with some kind of escape plan. But the creature had already made its own decision. Its body surged forward, its claws slashing through the trees as it moved with a power that shook the very ground beneath them. The warship above began to fire its weapons, the energy beams, cutting through the night like lightning. Jake felt the heat of the blasts as they rained down around them. The creature moved faster, its body a blur of motion, its growls becoming louder and more powerful with each step. It was leading them to safety, but it was also creating a diversion, buying them the time they needed to escape. They reached the edge of the cliffs, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. The drop was steep, and the jagged rocks below looked unforgiving. But the creature didn't hesitate. It leaped forward, without fear, its body soaring through the air and landing gracefully on the ledge below. Jake barely had time to react before the creature turned to face him, its eyes glowing brightly in the dark. The warship was above them, but they had made it to the one place the ship couldn't follow now. The creature had done its part. It had protected Jake and given them a chance to escape. And now it was time for them both to leave behind the past and move forward into whatever came next.